Hi there, Alison here with another Cab Franc du jour. Today we are in Chinon and we're looking at the Couly-Duthiel 1989 Clos de l'Olive Chinon. Couly-Duthiel is one of the Chinon appellation's most important producers. Not only do their vineyards account for around 4% of the total area under vine in the appellation, they count among their vineyard holdings two of Chinon's most prized vineyard sites, Clos de l'Echo and Clos de l'Olive, both of which are monopole holdings for Couly-Duthiel. Today, the domaine is being run by Arnaud Couly, who's the fourth generation and the great-grandson of Baptiste Duthiel, who founded the estate in 1921. So let's take a look at these two very special vineyards in Chinon. Clos de l'Echo and Clos de l'Olive are both located in the commune of Chinon. And the famed Clos de l'Echo is situated directly behind the Chinon fortress. And this vineyard's a fair size, about 17 hectares. And in the 12th century, it is believed the vineyard was owned by royalty. And by the 15th century, the vineyard made up part of the estate of Antoine Rabelais, who was the father of Chinon's most famous son, François Rabelais. Baptiste Duthiel purchased his first hectare here in 1925, and over time he slowly acquired all of the remaining parcels. Clos de l'Echo is situated predominantly on a steep south-facing slope, with the exception of a 5-hectare portion towards the top of the vineyard that is on a bit more of a plateau, sloping gently to the north. Here we're at one of the highest elevations in Chinon, about 95 to 98 meters above sea level. And in terms of soils here at Clos de l'Echo, we are dealing with predominantly a hydromorphic clay that's mixed with a bit of flint, and this dates to the Sinonian age, and this soil is known locally as granuelle. Looking a little bit closer now at Clos de l'Olive, this vineyard was acquired by René Couly in 1951. It is said to have been named after the Baron Charles Leinard de l'Olive, who was responsible for conquering Guadeloupe for the French in 1635 and was the island's first governor. This vineyard is around 3 hectares in size, and while a portion of the vineyard was replanted in the 1970s, there are some vines towards the top of the site that are over 100 years old. This vineyard is located about 500 meters east of the eastern border of the Chinon village, and we're set back about 1.5 kilometers north of the Vienne River. And this vineyard is on what we sometimes refer to as Chinon's premier côte, which is referring to the first in a series of these pockets of sloping vineyards that stretch from the eastern part of the Chinon commune all the way east into Cravon-les-Coteaux and also into Pont-Zoul. At the bottom of the vineyard, we're situated at an elevation of around 33 meters above sea level, and we rise to about 61 meters above sea level at the top of the vineyard. And we are on a full south-facing slope of moderate steepness, so we have great sun exposure to aid ripening. And then this vineyard is a true clos. It is surrounded entirely by walls, and this will impact the microclimate of the vineyard, making it a little bit warmer than had the walls not been there. In terms of soils, as I've noted in some previous videos, the Chinon commune is one of the most complex in the appellation in terms of the variability of terroirs from lieu-dit to lieu-dit and even from parcel to parcel. And while we do find the Middle Turonian white tuffeau chalk and the Upper Turonian yellow tuffeau chalk in the western part of the Chinon commune, in the eastern part of the Chinon commune, the slopes that are around 40 to 60 meters above sea level, these are dominated exclusively by the Upper Turonian yellow tuffeau chalk bedrock. At higher elevation sites in the eastern part of the Chinon commune, we find soils that date to the Sinonian and Bartonian ages, and these are various formations of sands and clays. And we also find in some higher elevation areas, we find wind-derived Aeolian sands that date to the Quaternary era. Here at Clos de l'Olive, we have two distinct terroirs. Towards the top of the vineyard, we have a very shallow, silty, sandy topsoil, and this sits atop the Upper Turonian yellow tuffeau chalk bedrock. And then in the lower portion of the vineyard, we find colluvium. I have referenced alluvium in previous videos, and this is the soil that hugs the banks of the Vienne River in Chinon. And alluvium is river-derived sediments, and they are sands, silts, and or gravels in terms of their textures. And alluvium will tend to have a bit more organic matter in it as well, which makes it a little bit more fertile. Colluvium, on the other hand, these soils are sediments that are derived through erosion, essentially through the gravitational movement of a parent material down a slope. Colluvium is more heterogeneous in terms of texture, and it's also less fertile than alluvium. And in terms of the textures of colluvium that we find in Chinon, it can vary. And here at Couly-Dutheil, we're dealing with a clay, sandy texture. And while alluvium and these alluvial soils in Chinon are known for producing Cabernet Franc grapes that are best suited for fruitier, early drinking styles of Chinon, in these sites where we find colluvium, particularly that which is derived from calcareous materials, like the upper Turonian yellow tuffeau chalk that we find here at Couly-Dutheil, these soils are really best suited for producing wines that are more structured and age-worthy. Now, before I get into the winemaking for this wine, a few thoughts on the vintage. As I mentioned, this is from 1989, and this vintage is arguably the best vintage for Cabernet Franc in the 1980s, and is regarded really alongside vintages like 1959 and 1964 for red wines from the central Loire Valley. The vintage was warm, it was long, and that allowed for full phenolic maturity of the grapes while maintaining balanced sugars and acidities. From a winemaking perspective, the winemaking for this wine has evolved since 1989. The fruit continues to be hand harvested and destemmed, and fermentation is done in stainless steel, and it sees approximately a 30-day maceration time. And Arnaud Couly has evolved his approach to élevage really since 2003. And this wine, along with Clos de l'Echo, since that time has been aged exclusively in stainless steel. In 1989, however, this wine would have been aged in larger oak barrels. Another interesting point about this wine is that this is a cellar release direct from the domaine, which I purchased back in 2021 from the online retailer Somm Select. So this wine was bottle aged in the underground tuffeau cellars of the domaine for over 30 years prior to release. And remarkably, it was only $68 a bottle. So let's see what this wine is giving us today. Now, of course, we should note that we are dealing with a 32-year-old Cabernet Franc, and of course that means that we're going to see some definite evolution in terms of the fruit profile on the nose and on the palate. So the fruits lean more in the red spectrum, but they are dried. So I'm getting a little bit of dried currant, there's a bit of dried cranberry as well. There's a bit of sour cherry here as well that is a bit dried. I'm also getting a bit of like a mandarin orange peel, which is really interesting. And I have experienced that sometimes with other examples of older Cabernet Franc, which I think is kind of cool. And in terms of the pyrazines, this wine certainly is a bit more savory, but I love it. It's got all of these great layers of like wet autumn leaves. There's some dried herbs here. There's a bit of cedar wood. There's a touch of spruce as well. And then of course we're getting into a lot of tertiary layers here. Chanterelle mushrooms. There's even like a bit of like a wet wool thing going on. Some leather. There's a bit of like a smoky ash thing happening, like almost like spent embers from a fire. There's also a really nice floral element to the wine and to the nose that for me, again, is coming through a bit more dry, but it's like dried rose petals, which is super interesting. On the palate, we're getting a lot of those similar fruits that we saw on the nose. The palate actually feels a little fresher than what the nose does. Yeah, there's a few other things that are going on the palate. There's a little bit of an olive note, touch of milk chocolate as well. The acidity is really lovely on this wine. Still quite pronounced, really vibrant, really fresh, really alive. In terms of the tannins are still quite firm, and there's a pronounced nature to the tannins. And I do think that there's enough concentration here in terms of the fruit, and the fruit still feels quite fresh to me. So I think that there is some good structure here that you could actually hold this even for a little bit longer. The texture of the tannins is almost cashmere-like, if that makes any sense to anybody. So there's a softness, like a fuzziness to the tannin texture, but it's not quite as tightly woven. The wine feels remarkably fleshy and round, which is a bit surprising considering how old it is. But there's a lot of concentration here. There's a lot of depth. There's a lot of layers and persistence. And wines like this really evoke a lot of memories and emotion for me. And it literally reminds me of like the quintessential fall day where, you know, there's a crispness and a coolness in the air. You smell the leaves that have fallen off of the trees. Perhaps there's a fire going in a fireplace, and you get that fireplace smell as well. And it's like you just reached into your cedar chest and you pulled out your favorite wool sweater, and you smell a bit of the lanolin, you smell the cedar chest as well. And it's like this wine is kind of embodying all of those elements for me today. It's really quite cool, and I'm approaching a major milestone with respect to this project. This is video number 99, so I felt it was necessary to open something special like this. If you've had the Clos de l'Olive or even the Clos de l'Ego from Couly-Duthiel, let me know what vintage you had, what you thought of it in the comments below. And of course, as always, I will be back again soon with another wine. Cheers.